I mean, I still kind of live in that uncertainty because we don't know. But I've gotten over that over the years, right? There's just certain things that you know you you just understand that you're not gonna figure it out, and that there's
Right.
much better places to spend your energy and your time. And coming up with the hypothesis helps too because I can kind of put it into that box whether my doctors say they've at least said it's plausible. So but yeah, it's still one of those things that, and there's millions of people that are in the same boat. They just don't know why.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stephenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast. Of course, our ongoing goal is to help our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. Appreciate you taking time out of your day in the beautiful summer weather that they're currently in the midst of, certainly here in Toronto, Canada. And I'm certain that hoping it's as good as for you as it is here for us. Now, we'll be talking about epilepsy on this edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. And for those of you who are familiar with it or maybe you've never encountered it before, epilepsy is a neurological disorder that's typically characterized by seizures, and they're oftentimes reoccurrent, and they're also very unexpected. It's sort of an abnormal electrical activity in the brain, and the thing with seizures is that they can vary widely in terms of severity and can have significant impact on a person's quality of life. I would imagine epilepsy as a challenging obstacle course, for example, where there's unexpected hurdles and twists and turns along the way. Our guest, John Tuteur, has navigated this course with resiliency and determination, showing us that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to overcome challenges and find a path forward. Jonathan is an executive leadership coach. He's a consultant. He's a speaker, published author. He's got so many things going on for him, and he's bravely shared his journey of living with epilepsy. His personal story serves as an inspiration to many, showing that with the right mindset and determination, one can face any obstacle head on. In this episode, John shares his insights into his personal experience with epilepsy. He highlights the importance of emotional intelligence in coping with this condition, and that's so important, as well as he talks about finding purpose in life despite the challenges he has faced. So now that we got you all set, let's turn our conversation over to Jonathan. Enjoy. Hey, John, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I so appreciate you taking the time and do this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, on this podcast, we spend, a significant amount of time just really encouraging. It's really about encouraging more than anything else, encouraging individuals to live their best audacious life. That's what we want individuals to understand, because by doing so, it allows you to be who you truly are meant to be in this world. And there's also the positive ripple effects that come out of that. Now, the thing that oftentimes happens is there's obstacles, there's challenges, there's roadblocks, there's pitfalls, all the yucky stuff that we don't want to deal with that we have to in order to get to that best audacious life. And it's really incumbent on us to figure out a way to get up, over, around, or through that obstacle that's in our path to where the greatness lies for us on the other side. And in terms of obstacles and challenges, certainly dealing with epilepsy is something that you can certainly speak to, and what you've had to overcome to be able to get yourself to the place where you're at now. And so I've kind of set the table a little bit. So perhaps as a starting point, we'll get you to sort of open up to our listeners and have them understand a little bit about you and what you do and what brought you up to the point that you're at now.
Yeah. So I am an executive leadership coach, consultant, speaker, facilitator. I do a lot of different things. Also soon to be published author. So that's pretty
Nice.
exciting about my journey with epilepsy and sort of overcoming that. So, a perfect fit with this. A lot of people assume that I was born with epilepsy. In fact, I've yet to meet someone who hasn't assumed that. The reality is that I had my first seizure when I was 30.
Okay.
And that's actually pretty common that it comes comes on at different parts of life. I mean, it really can impact anyone at any time. The other part of it that's kind of difficult is we still don't know why. So that uncertainty about, okay, well, what actually brought this on? And we have a hypothesis, but we can't prove it scientifically, so I'm not going to go into that. But I didn't have a traumatic brain injury. I didn't have a concussion. I didn't have any of these things that could be typical causes for
Right.
epilepsy. So.
And that period of uncertainty is a tough place to be, right? Like there's something going on with you, it's not right, you're trying to figure it out, and no one has the answers. Geez, that's not feeling good.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of that. In fact, the third seizure that I had, which I still at this point didn't know that the first two were seizures, or even that this third one was, happened to be in your country. I was in Ottawa on a work trip, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in an ER, in Ottawa, and the ER doctor diagnoses me with epilepsy and gives me Dilantin. And before I can even ask questions or have a conversation, he's out of the room. So that was also quite jarring. And wait, what? Like, what was not in my plan or on my radar or anything like that. So yeah, the uncertainty in general has been just, we just want to know. And when we don't, it's a difficult thing to sit with.
How long did you live in that place of uncertainty?
I mean, I still kind of live in that uncertainty because we don't know. But I've gotten over that over the years, right? There's just certain things that you just understand that you're not gonna figure it out, and that there's much better places to spend your energy and your time. And coming up with the hypothesis helps too, because I can kind of put it into that box. Whether my doctors say they've at least said it's plausible, so. But yeah, it's still one of those things and there's millions of people that are in the same boat. They just don't know why.
I really do appreciate that point you make around not really knowing why, but still not devoting energy to figuring that out, because ultimately, and not that knowing the root, because there are instances when you figuring out the root cause of something, how it can aid you moving forward. But there's other times where it just won't matter. Like it just will not matter. You've got what you've got in front of you, and you've got to deal with that. Making that distinction between the two sometimes, like to resolve that's challenging for people, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I mean, at the end of the day, what difference does it make? So I find out that, okay, I did fall and hit my head when I was 4, and I just don't remember. And that, like, what difference does it really make? It doesn't, right? So it's really putting my energy into, okay, how do I figure out how to live my best life with this, right? What's the right path for me now? Because with this obstacle in the way, like, what am I going to do with that? And figuring out how it started is just not important.
It's almost like, okay, so now now what, right? I'm like, okay, now what, right? It's still there.
Yeah.
So you say you're 30. Was that's when you had your first seizure?
Yes.
Right. So up until that point, life was, well, use the word normal, or what was life?
Yeah, that's always the fun question. What was your life like before? Yeah, I mean, there's the way I always describe it is pretty normal. The one thing that I highlight is I'm a triplet. People tend to find that interesting. I have an older brother. And then when I mention that I'm a triplet and have epilepsy, the next question is, I'll let you guess what that question would be.
Do they have it as well?
Yes, exactly.
Ding, ding. All right.
Yeah. And the answer to that's no. As I like to say, I'm the lucky one. Having said that, they have had their fair share of medical stuff too. But yeah, pretty normal life beforehand. I was a workaholic, worked 60, 80, sometimes more than that, hours a week. But yeah, I mean, it's just pretty normal.
I'm sure there's a bunch of other typical triplet questions that you get that I probably could guess and maybe not. But I want maybe we'll get back to that. But in terms of you talk about this, the workaholic life. Again, we're talking about contributing factors. Could that have been connected anyway?
Yeah, it's interesting. The second seizure was at work here back in the DC area,
Okay.
and my similar situation. I was in a meeting, and next thing I know, I'm in an ER in Arlington, Virginia, or DC, and I woke up with my boss in the room, and a really close friend, and she blamed it on herself. She was like, I've been putting too much stress on you, right?
Mm.
Um, so, could it have been the stress and the lack of sleep and all the work that I was doing? Possibly. But again, we just don't know. I actually had a very heated, maybe it wasn't, maybe not that heated, but I had a pretty direct conversation with one of the neurologists that I was working with at Johns Hopkins. And he was very adamant about the fact that there's no research, there's no data that shows that stress is a trigger for epilepsy and seizures. And I have a really hard time with that because I've yet to meet anyone who has epilepsy that, stress is not a trigger for them.
Mm.
So at some point I want to do that research study, but I do believe stress is part of it,
Okay.
for sure.
So you're in the hospital, doctor's giving you whatever and gone, and he's gone on the next patient, perhaps. You're with a whole bunch of questions. What do you do? What's next?
Yeah. So got back home to DC, and luckily I had my brother, my triplet brother, had a good friend whose dad was a doctor who knew a bunch of neurologists, and so I went on sort of the neurologist tour, met
Mm.
with 3 neurologists, and had to pick one that I was comfortable with, which I did, and then we sort of went from there in terms of doing all the testing and um, medication and all of that. So at that point, it still wasn't 100% clear that, okay, this is epilepsy. They were pretty certain based on the descriptions that they had heard. But there were only 3 episodes, but then there were more, and so it was pretty clear. And we picked a different medication at that point. Dilantin, for the listeners, is one of the first anti-seizure medications, but has been, for the most part, surpassed by more modern drugs, if you will. So that was also a big surprise when, why Dilantin?
Got you.
But yeah, anyway, so it was quite the process to get to, stabilization, if you will.
And then, sure. I read 500 seizures.
Yeah.
In what period of time are we talking about, John?
Yeah, more than 500 seizures between ages 30 and 44. Yeah, here's the other thing I'll say for the listeners. A lot of people think that a seizure is a grand mal seizure, right? So someone loses consciousness, they fall down, they shake uncontrollably, they
Right.
make some noises, they might bite their tongue. That's one of more than 30 different types of seizures.
Okay. Okay.
And that's, it's typically surprising for people.
Mm-hmm.
Epilepsy is a really complex disease. And there's still so much that, doctors don't know about it. And that was another really hard thing for me, is there was a lot of drug trial and error. Oh, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. That didn't work. Let's add that. It's still just very, very complicated. But my seizures, I've had 2 types. One is grand mal, or what's called medically tonic-clonic seizures. I've had a number of those, but the majority of the seizures I've had is what's called focal aware seizures. And so what does that mean? I'm actually conscious. I'm awake while it's happening.
Okay.
Like I could be
Okay.
having a conversation with you. There's sort of 3 pieces to it. There's a really nauseating smell, an aura. So, I I describe it as it's like I'm watching a movie in my brain, like my
Yep.
brain's playing a movie of something that's already happened in my life. It's like a flashback.
Okay.
And then I get really sweaty, and the nausea sort of continues to escalate, and then it stops. It also, the focal aware seizures tend to cluster. So, a couple hours later, over the next couple of days, there'll be um, more of those, and then eventually they stop. But the end result is, I liken it to writing with a dull pencil. Um, it's sometimes hard to read your handwriting because the lines are more faint; they're not as crisp. And so I'm left with this dullness, for a good period of time, sometimes, weeks at a time, and memory is impacted. There's just a variety of things that I just feel off. It really takes time to sort of recover from that. I mean, it's electrical activity. It's essentially an electrical storm in your brain. So anyway, I'll stop my education.
No, we're going to continue the education because I want, if there's an opportunity, if you were to sort of provide sort of a simplified explanation of what epilepsy is for those who are hearing it. And we generally talk about, we understand it's some condition that starts in the brain, right? But if you could just sort of help people who don't know anything about it all understand what you're dealing with here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an electrical storm in your brain that causes, in extreme cases, um, unconsciousness and, movements that are involuntary. And
Right.
when that happens, the next day you're really sore. Like, I mean, you're an athlete.
Mhm.
I'll wake up after a tonic-clonic seizure and I'll be sore in places that I've never been sore before or
Yep.
as sore.
Mm-hmm.
And I've run marathons before, and it's like worse than that in some cases. The pain afterwards, because your
Mm-hmm.
muscles are clenching so tightly. So yeah, I mean, it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And again, we still, doctors still don't really know
Right.
that much about it. That's the hard part. So yes, there's a lot of medication and there've been a lot of technological advances.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, it is still so much of the medication is a trial and error game.
Right.
I felt like a lab rat for for a really long period of time.
And it goes without saying that this is an incurable disease too. Let's also make that clear.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, since you brought that up, I'll make my plug for Cure Epilepsy, Citizens
Yeah.
United for Research in Epilepsy. That is their main mission, is how do we find a cure? And you're right, there is not yet a cure.
So, can we talk about the impacts, the alterations to your everyday life now? Because you said before you were healthy, you ran marathons, life was good, so to speak, and this comes along. How did it change things for you?
Yeah, logistically, I'll start there. The law in the United States, where I was living, was you can't drive for
Mhm.
12 months after you have a seizure. You need to be seizure free for 12 months. Now, different states have different laws. Some states it's 3 months, some states are
Love that.
6.
Yeah.
DC was 12. So rather than stare at my car, and have it tease me sitting there collecting dust, I sold it.
Right. Right.
And that just changes how we live.
Yes.
I had to take, luckily I was living in a city, so I had public transportation to get to work. But there's lots of people with epilepsy that don't have that option. So I was very lucky from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, sold my car, that changed things. Other things like, I would run alone. I actually enjoy the time to think and process.
Mhm.
I really don't, I don't run with music. That's sort of my time to work through all my stuff. But I had to run with a band with my contact information on it in case I had a
Right.
seizure while running. Like,
Right.
I could be, lying there in the middle of a, field, and no one, knows who I am. So again, not a big deal to wear that, but it was just some of these things
Sure.
that you otherwise wouldn't think about.
You're not conscious about, right, right.
Yeah. And the other thing, my mom got me one of those, I call it the I've fallen and I can't get up machines. So I was living alone in an apartment in DC.
Right, right,
And, her concern, she went to, well, what if you have a seizure in your apartment and you hurt yourself and nobody knows because you're not living with anyone? And
right.
this was a way of, notifying them or other people, okay, yeah, I'm hurt. And thankfully I never actually had to use it. But those are some of the things that
Got you,
the
got you.
life was altered a bit.
And so when an individual suffers from a seizure, the length of time it can last for is dependent on the circumstance and situation. Is it a matter of I have a seizure, I get up and continue life now, or what is it, like a reset button, or what happens at that point?
Yeah, the length of time does vary, and the longer the seizure, certainly the more damage that can be done. My seizures typically lasted, a couple of minutes at the most, thankfully. And what happens afterwards, yes, you can kind of go on with, but there's sort of there's just this fog and this haze that you're kind of walking around with, because your brain just did this. Again, I'm going to use a sports analogy or a fitness analogy. It's like you just went through this really challenging workout. I mean, your brain is really going overdrive. So you need some time to rest and
Mm,
recover and refresh and reboot. I mean, it's almost like you have to reboot your brain, because uh, it it's just in a state of flux and confusion. So can you go on with your life as usual? And did I? Yes, of course. I had to. I didn't really have a choice in many situations.
right.
But it does take time to get back to feeling quote unquote normal after a seizure, for sure.
Wow. Yeah, no, I guess what gets me as we're talking about this, the multiple impacts and what can come out of this, um and just how it can impact people's lives in a number of different ways. And I mean, even if you think of someone's state of mind or mood is now changed. Like, for example, I mean, use the car. You had to sell your car and you've got no options. What that can do to people. And look, and John, as our life is challenging as is, right? It offers enough complication as is. This element or aspect, it just can take it to a whole other level. And so hearing just that, I'm going, wow, wow, the impacts there.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to go here, but dating was something that came up at the time. I was single. I wasn't married, didn't have a family,
Hmm.
uh, and I was always sort of in the back of my mind worried about, okay, when do I have this conversation? When do I let this person know? Do I let this person know? How are they going to react? And I always had this like vision of someone, I'm telling them, and it's like they look down at their phone like, oh, I'm sorry, my mom's calling. Hang on a second. Right? Like, oh, sorry, I gotta go. Right? The whole fake thing to get out of a date.
I've been there, man. I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about. Which
right.
I haven't had seizures, so I get you.
So there's it's it impacts all parts of your life. I mean, even your loved ones, your caretaker, right? Like now, my parents, I'm in my 30s at this point, and they have to worry about me living independently, living alone. Whereas before, okay, he's got this. But yeah, it impacts the individual for sure, but it impacts all the people around them as
Gotcha.
well.
Got you. Um, Emotional intelligence is something that I understand is important to you as well. How does that factor into to just your life and how you cope with epilepsy? Is there a connection between the two?
Yeah. So I was first introduced to emotional intelligence in college,
Hmm.
and I sort of fell in love with it then. And then later in my career, I was able to to focus some more time on it and certified in the emotional intelligence quotient inventory, which is the leading assessment on emotional intelligence. So I do a lot of that work with my clients. And I leaned into that quite a bit as I was dealing with this, because
Right.
it's, it'd be so easy to just go down the rabbit hole of why me, why me, why me, this sucks, this is awful, this is the way, like, but, you know, I had to take a step back and recognize, okay, what is this? How is this serving me? Right? How can I take these emotions, these negative emotions, and use them more positively? Because there's no benefit in going down the rabbit hole. Like, what good does that do? Just gets me more angry, it gets me more
Right.
frustrated, more upset, but there's nothing I can do about it, right? So what's the what's the gift in it is really what I tried to focus on is,
Hmm.
how do I take this and turn it into a positive? And so, I really got involved in various epilepsy causes, helping organizations, um, to find a cure, to
Yes.
help
Yeah.
other people with epilepsy, to raise money for the cause. That was one of the big ways that I was able to, shift that negative energy into something positive.
And I know I asked specifically about epilepsy, but that approach your mind set, because that's what we're talking about, that can be applied to just about any situation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I really believe is there's a gift in pretty much every situation in life. Even though it might seem like it's really difficult or an obstacle, it's how do we shift our focus to what is
Right.
that gift?
Gotcha.
And I love Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. I've referenced that
Mm,
before. But
powerful.
it's so
Good
true,
one.
right? Like right? Like we all are going to face obstacles many times in our lives. And it's, to your point earlier, how do we deal with those obstacles, those challenges?
Right.
Are we going to let it take over and bring us down? Or, how can we grow from this? How can we make this the best it can possibly be? And
Yeah.
that was really, really what I tried to do as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's tremendous in terms of what it can do for us, in terms of us pushing past obstacles and what the difference it can make in our lives. And the thing that I often references, when you get to the other side of that, right? And we fought through it, you're like, wow, like I needed to go. It almost like I needed to go through that journey, right?
Yeah.
As difficult as it might be to fathom before that process, before that difficulty started, is like, yeah, I need to get to this point, and now I'm here. I need to go through that fight. It built my tolerance level. It made me stronger. It gave me wisdom. I've gained new experiences, insights, and perspectives. So there's the takeaways are huge, but we still have to continue to fight to get those to that point. And that's really is a chicken before the egg, right? Like how you gonna learn before, right? You got to have those obstacles as much as we don't want them.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Uh, yeah. And, ultimately, I had 3 brain surgeries. That's how I finally kind of got this under control. But the reason I ultimately decided on getting brain surgery, because it wasn't one of these things like you have to do it. And at first I was like, there's no way you're going to perform surgery on my brain like that.
Right, right.
But wait, what? But my older daughter saw me have a tonic-clonic seizure one day, and that she was just so frightened,
Right.
and
Yep.
that was kind of the impetus. I'm like,
Yep.
I can't put I can put myself through this. I can't put my kids through this.
Understood. Understood. And so, if you were to sort of identify, or where you're at now, in terms of your overall health, obviously your epilepsy is still there. We talked earlier; it doesn't have a cure, so it's not gone away. How are you living with it now in your everyday life?
Yeah. So the third and final surgery was about 2.5 years ago, and since then I've only had one set of I had a cluster of a couple of seizures once, about a year and a half ago, and that was only because I forgot to take my medication.
Okay.
So since I've been taking medication, I've been seizure free. That was also a real challenge for me, as I sort of made this assumption, or at least I heard from my doctor, that eventually at some point after the third surgery, I wouldn't need to be on medication anymore.
Okay.
Because the medication has significant side effects that aren't particularly fun. But that, come to find out that's really not the case. Very, very few people are able to be medication free. So I really had to shift, again, talking about mindset, shift my mindset around, okay, what is success here?
Right.
Success for me initially was no more seizures, no more medication,
Okay.
because I want to feel like I used to feel without these side effects. Well, that's just not, it's not realistic. It's probably not going to happen. So success is just no seizures on medication, and hopefully, and we've decreased the medication a little bit. Hopefully we can continue to do that to some extent, but I think the medication is just going to be there for the rest of my life. And that's okay.
Gotcha.
I've come to grips with that.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, yeah, again, it's, I think the coming to grips piece, as you said there, is an important part of the journey, an important part of the process. And to know that you've done that is a great thing, not a good thing, a great thing. So congratulations on that. You're certainly doing also a lot of awareness and sort of advocacy work. Is that fair to say, to help
Yeah.
others understand if there's a particular thing that, maybe, we already talked what this disease is, and we don't have an answer for you. Is there anything else people need to know or understand about epilepsy?
Yeah. So there's still a significant, there's a fair amount of stigma still associated with it.
Okay.
Certainly not to the extent that there was in decades past, but I've shared this story before, but I think it's as many people need to hear it as possible. I was at an epilepsy conference about 2 years ago, and I met a pediatric neurologist who was telling me a story about, a patient was coming in to see him with his mother, and he's having uncontrolled seizures, and the mother looked at the doctor and said, "Hey, we're taking little Davy to church on Sunday for an exorcism," and the doctor's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 no, no, he's not possessed by the devil.
Right.
That's not what this is."
Mm,
And that's 2021. Like, there's still people in this country that believe that. There's still people in this world that believe that if you're having a seizure, you're possessed by the devil. That is just flatly false. And I think just don't be afraid of when you see that, right? What can you do to help?
mhm.
And recognize also, like, it really can impact anyone at any time. And there's a much larger number of people out there that are impacted by it than I think many people realize. In the United States alone, 1 in
Right.
26 people have epilepsy.
Mm,
It's very likely that your listeners know someone, even if they don't think they do, because again, there's still the stigma and people don't want to talk about it. And so that's also a lot of what I try to do, is talk about it as much as I can to normalize it, to help people understand what it is. Because again, when you lose control of your body, or these motions, or all these different things that people are not used to seeing, you make all kinds of assumptions about what's going on. So yeah, I just really hope that people really start to understand what it is and recognize that there's still so much we need to do to get to a place where we can find a cure.
gotcha. Well, I very much appreciate the work that you're doing and helping to do that, and helping people understand, and the advocacy and the enlightenment and the education, because that's kind of really where it starts. And so thank you. Congratulations on your journey to getting where you're at. We talked about the obstacles, and you went through them. And what's nice about that story of getting through the obstacles, it's one thing to go through challenging periods. You get to the other side, great, and continue on with your life. You're actually going back and saying, okay, who else can we get through this door with me? Who else can we help along? Who else can we aid? I've got some insights I'm willing to share to make maybe someone else's journey not as challenging or difficult. That's very, very commendable, John, and thank you for doing that. You are making a difference, no question. And I appreciate you for being here and sharing your story here on the Audacious Living podcast, because again, without any of these things that you're doing for yourself and helping others, nobody can live that best audacious life. And so again, thank you. And being here helps further our message as well. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I mention my book real fast?
Please. Oh, please. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Get that out there. Yeah,
That's
sure.
okay. Yeah, in terms of helping others, I recently completed a memoir focused on my life with epilepsy, and it is called Seizing Today:
Okay.
Discovering Purpose and Authenticity in a Life-Changing Diagnosis. It is not available yet, but at some point in the summer, my publisher's telling me June, July-ish.
Okay.
But be available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the typical sites. So yeah, just please go ahead, pick it up, and hopefully people will enjoy it.
Very cool. For our listeners that wanted to connect with you directly, where can we send them?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. So Jonathan-Tutor is my handle. I am also working on updating my website, so there will be a johntutor.com here shortly.
Nice.
Not yet, but that'll be another place where people can find me.
Got you. It's only fitting that I kind of circle back on being one of three triplets, and maybe just before we wrap up here, give me the best three things about being a triplet.
So a lot of people will say, "Oh, do you feel each other's pain?" And we're fraternal.
Okay.
And maybe that's more of a an identical twin thing to some extent. But there is I do sense when something's wrong with, particularly with my brother. It's sort of just a sixth sense. So I think that so I'll pick up the phone and call me, "Everything okay?" And almost every time there's something going on. Just the closeness. When you share a womb with two other people and a room with my brother for 17 years, the conversations that you can have, and just sharing. We just shared everything.
Yes.
So that was just really cool. We just went through the same stuff together at the same time. We had a lot of the same friends. It just that just was really, really fun. What else?
That's one. That's right. That's the first one.
Yeah. What else would I say? It's fun talking about it because people are interested in it, right?
Right.
So sort of we kind of documented here are the 3 to 5 questions that everybody asks about about a triplet, and so you just kind of we're ready for the answers, but it's an easy conversation starter, and it's fun to talk about.
Yeah.
And I'd say the third one is how much I appreciate my parents. Now having 2 young kids, my older brother is only 2.5 years older. They had 4 kids under the age of 3.
Wow.
4 kids in diapers, 4 kids in college. Just like, "Mom, Dad, how did you do this? What, how did you stay sane?" Or so some of the story I do tell some of those stories in my book as well. But I can't thank my parents enough for what they've done. And what they've sacrificed and what they've taught us all. We are very lucky to have them. Love you, Mom and Dad.
Awesome. John, thank you for this. This is great. And all the best, my friend.
Thank you, Audley. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Back we are on the podcast, and as Jonathan's journey demonstrates, life's obstacles like epilepsy can test our resilience and determination. By shifting our mindset and focusing on the positives, we can transform challenges into opportunities for growth and empowerment. You're certainly able to connect with John directly and learn more about his work by reaching out to him. We will, of course, have the contact details in the show notes below. He's open to offer insights and provide support and inspiration as relates to overcoming obstacles and living that audacious life. Certainly look out for Jonathan's upcoming memoir. Again, it's called Seizing Today, Discovering Purpose and Authenticity in Life-Challenging Diagnosis. That's available at Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, wherever you get your books. Definitely encourage you to check that out. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. And obviously, if you've enjoyed this episode, we would encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, share, and that's how we can spread this audacious journey to so many others. Really, that's kind of it. We've come to the end of the episode, man. It's been a great one. Thank you for being here. Together we can achieve greatness, and I encourage you to go out and do so. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.